For years, one of the biggest banks in America was quietly opening millions of accounts its own customers never asked for. Not by accident, not a glitch, on purpose, by design, pushed down from the top of the company, one employee at a time. Real people's names, real social security numbers, fake signatures, fake emails, accounts nobody wanted, costing people real fees, dinging real credit scores, and almost nobody noticed for years. This is the story of how Wells Fargo, a bank that spent decades selling itself as the trustworthy, all-American choice, built an entire secret production line of fraud inside its own branches, and how the people at the very top walked away richer while the employees who got caught took the fall alone. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how it worked, why it took so long to stop, and the one thing you should check on your own accounts right now, because this exact scheme is not as extinct as the headlines made it look. Before any of this came out, Wells Fargo was the golden child of American banking. While other giant banks were busy blowing themselves up in the 2008 financial crisis, Wells Fargo came through looking almost untouched. Warren Buffett himself owned a massive stake in the company and called it one of the best-run banks in the country. Wall Street analysts pointed to Wells Fargo's stock again and again as proof that a big bank could be boring, safe, and still make enormous profits. And the secret behind that boring safety, the thing Wells Fargo bragged about in every investor call, was something called cross-selling. Get one customer, then sell that same customer a checking account, a savings account, a credit card, a line of credit, an insurance product, until one person was quietly paying for 8 or more different Wells Fargo products. Executives loved this number so much they built the entire growth strategy of the company around it. Here's where it turns from smart business into something much darker. That cross-selling number, the target of 8 products per household, was not a suggestion. Inside the branches, it became a daily, hourly quota that every single teller and personal banker had to hit, or face consequences. Some branches ran sales boards on the wall, updated multiple times a day, so every employee could see exactly who was behind. Managers held calls, sometimes 4 times a day, demanding updates on where each employee stood against the number 8. Workers who missed quota got written up. Workers who kept missing quota got fired. And in an economy where a steady bank job with benefits was hard to walk away from, thousands of ordinary employees were staring at an impossible choice: hit numbers that didn't reflect real customer demand, or lose their paycheck. So employees found a way to survive the quota without losing any actual customers, by inventing them instead. Using real customers' information they already had on file, some employees opened extra checking or savings accounts nobody requested, sometimes moving tiny amounts of money between a customer's real account and the new fake one just to make it look active. Others created brand new credit cards in a customer's name, without ever telling them, then activated the cards and enrolled them in paid features like overdraft protection. Some even set up fake email addresses using combinations like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at gmail.com, just so the online banking enrollment forms would have something to put in the box, so a customer would never even get the notification email telling them a new account existed. Multiply that by thousands of employees, over years, under constant quota pressure, and you get a number few people could have imagined. Millions of accounts that were never supposed to exist. This wasn't some deeply hidden secret nobody at the company knew about. Long before the public ever heard the words fake accounts, employees inside Wells Fargo were trying to sound the alarm. The company even had an internal ethics hotline specifically for reporting exactly this kind of misconduct. Multiple employees later said that when they called that hotline to report the pressure and the fake accounts happening around them, the retaliation came fast, not against the managers running the scheme, but against the employees who reported it. Some were fired within weeks of making a report. One employee later testified that after reporting suspicious activity, she was investigated, accused of poor performance, and pushed out, while the branch manager she reported kept climbing the ladder. When the people trying to do the right thing get punished, and the people gaming the system get promoted, that's not a broken employee, that's a broken system, built that way from the top. It took an outside investigation to finally force this into daylight. Reporters at the Los Angeles Times spent months digging through lawsuits, interviewing former employees, and piecing together a pattern that Wells Fargo had spent years quietly settling and denying. Their reporting, published back in 2013, described exactly the sales pressure and the fake accounts, years before regulators ever fined the bank a single dollar. For a while, the story mostly sat there. Wells Fargo kept posting strong earnings. Executives kept talking about cross-selling on investor calls like it was still their proudest achievement. It took federal regulators actually opening their own investigation, digging through internal complaint records and customer disputes, to turn one newspaper story into a case regulators could no longer ignore. In September of 2016, it finally became public in a way nobody could look away from. Wells Fargo agreed to pay $185 million to settle claims from federal regulators in the city of Los Angeles. At the time, that fine was described as the largest penalty of its kind that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau had ever handed down. The number that came out with it stopped people cold. Over 2 million deposit and credit card accounts had been opened without customers' knowledge or permission, going back years. To a company the size of Wells Fargo, $185 million was almost a rounding error, less than what the bank sometimes made in a single day. But the number of fake accounts was the part that made this feel different from just another bank getting a slap on the wrist. Here's the part that should make you angry. In the years leading up to that settlement, Wells Fargo had already quietly fired around 5,300 employees connected to the scandal. 5,300. And almost every single one of them was a low-level teller or personal banker, the people closest to the actual fake accounts, the people who felt the daily quota pressure most directly. Meanwhile, almost none of the senior executives who built and enforced that quota system in the first place faced any real consequences in those first months. The people at the bottom of the org chart, making some of the lowest salaries in the entire company, took nearly all the blame, while the people who designed the incentive system that created this mess kept collecting their bonuses like nothing had happened. Then came the hearing that turned this from a business story into a national moment. Wells Fargo CEO at the time, John Stumpf, was called in front of the Senate Banking Committee to explain himself, live on camera. Senator Elizabeth Warren did not go easy on him. She asked him directly why he hadn't resigned, why he hadn't returned a single dollar of the compensation he personally earned while this scheme ran under him, and why 5,000 low-level employees lost their jobs while he kept his. At one point, she told him plainly that he should resign and be criminally investigated, calling it gutless leadership. Within weeks, under enormous public and regulatory pressure, Stumpf did resign, forfeiting tens of millions of dollars in unvested stock and giving up his salary for the rest of that year. It was one of the most public falls from grace a sitting bank CEO had faced in years. But the person who ran the actual division where the fake accounts happened almost got away completely clean. Carrie Tolstedt, the executive in charge of the community banking unit at the center of the scandal, announced her retirement from Wells Fargo just before the story broke wide open publicly, walking out with a retirement package worth somewhere around $125 million in stock, options, and pension. For years afterward, she faced no serious penalty at all, while the tellers under her division had already been fired in the thousands. It wasn't until years later, in 2020, that regulators finally caught up with her personally, banning her permanently from ever working in banking again and fining her $25 million, a rare case of an individual bank executive facing real personal consequences. But by then, the years-long gap between what happened to her and what happened to the employees under her had already told its own story about how this system protects the people at the top. The $185 million fine turned out to be just the opening chapter, not the ending. As regulators kept digging, the true number of fake accounts kept climbing, from 2 million to an eventual estimate of around 3.5 million unauthorized accounts opened over roughly a decade. In 2018, the Federal Reserve took an almost unheard-of step. It capped the total size of Wells Fargo's entire balance sheet, legally blocking the bank from growing any bigger until it proved it had fixed its internal controls, a restriction that stayed in place for 7 full years. In 2020, the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission added a $3 billion settlement on top of everything else. By the time you add every fine, every settlement, and every dollar paid out across the full scandal, the total cost to Wells Fargo runs well past $3 billion, on top of a stock price hit and a reputation that still hasn't fully recovered. With a scandal this size, 3.5 million fake accounts, billions in fines, a sitting CEO forced out on live television, you'd expect at least someone to face criminal charges. Almost nobody did. The company itself signed what's called a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice, meaning Wells Fargo as a corporation avoided a formal criminal conviction by paying its fines and agreeing to reforms. A handful of executives, including Carrie Tolstedt and John Stumpf, were later hit with civil bans from the banking industry and personal fines, but none of them were charged criminally, and none of them spent a single day in jail. Compare that to what happens to an ordinary person caught using someone else's identity to open an account, and the gap becomes impossible to ignore. For regular people, that's called identity theft, and it comes with real prison time. For a bank that did it 3.5 million times, it came with a fine the company could pay out of a few weeks of profit. Here's why this isn't just a story about one bank from a decade ago. The exact mechanics behind this scandal, unauthorized accounts opened using information a company already has on you, still show up today in smaller, quieter forms at other banks, telecom companies, and subscription services. The fix is boring, but it works. Pull your full credit report at least once a year, completely free, and actually read every account listed on it, not just skim it. If you ever see an account you don't recognize, dispute it immediately, in writing, and ask the company directly for the original signed application. Set up account alerts on your bank app, so any new account or product opened under your name sends you an instant text or email, not a letter that arrives 2 weeks later. None of this takes more than 20 minutes a year, and it's the difference between catching a fake account in days instead of years. At the end of the day, what happened at Wells Fargo wasn't really about a handful of dishonest tellers. It was about an entire incentive system built and enforced from the top that made fraud the easiest way to survive a Tuesday. When the truth came out, the system did what these systems almost always do. It let the people closest to the bottom take the fall first, while the people who built the pressure in the first place negotiated their exit on the way out the door. If this opened your eyes to how much power sits quietly behind the numbers a company chooses to reward, subscribe, because we break down exactly how the financial system really works, one real story at a time, and the next one might explain something happening in your own wallet right now.